My dear friends, I want to thank you for your faithfulness to my dad in being willing to join me virtually, despite the fact that due to the pandemic, all the public events connected to the 99th anniversary of his birthday had to be postponed. Let's hope for better times. I already hope for a special celebration of my father's 100th anniversary of birth on November 16th, 2021. By that time, I hope we can all get together and for those who want to, go to Mass. For others who want to come here at the Paper Valley Hotel and eat, drink with music, hopefully the music of Scott Dirks, and share stories about my father. But for now, Joseph Biden, as he said during the presidential debate, has warned us of a dark winter. As the darkness caused by the coronavirus continues to descend on the Fox Valley, I still sense the need to come here to Appleton, to the Paper Valley Hotel anyway, and remember my father with you all by live stream. A number of my friends have expressed fear and dismay at my willingness to even come to Appleton at all during this pandemic. But I want to reassure them that this happens to be my third stay in Appleton here at the Paper Valley Hotel since the pandemic began. The staff here has provided us with the safety and comfort we have always come to expect when we visit here in Appleton. And this has been an exceptionally difficult time for all our friends in the travel, restaurant, hotel business. I pray that people can continue to choose to patronize these businesses when they need to, even in these difficult times. I want to personally thank two friends who encouraged me as I prepared this presentation, John Bergstrom and Terry Hinnendale. Both these men embody the kind of virtue that my father brought to the vocation of business here in the Valley. In their willingness to show me friendship all these years, they have witnessed to me their deep capacity for friendship. This talk would have been impossible without their presence to me. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, John. I want to thank my friend Joel Cott from Sheboygan for being willing to come to Appleton and assist me with the needed technology. I want to send special greetings here to my beloved cousins and family members here in the Valley, especially Mario Maggiorana and Jim Maggiorana, Margie Stack and Jim Stack, and Joe Zuehlke. You know how much Dad loved you and everybody else in the family. I look forward to seeing you personally during better times. The title of my talk is also the title of a book I'm writing about my father's life. It's called Banking on the Common Good. The subtitle of my talk is The Legacy of Gus Zuehlke Sr. as a Remedy for the Crisis of Our Times. Another possible subtitle could be A Dialogue of the Heart Between a Father and a Son. In this presentation, I want to share with you the secrets of love hidden in plain sight. John Donne says this about these secrets: I can speak of loving and yet reveal no secret, for nothing I say will make sense to it except to another who loves. All one finds without loving are fragments of a discourse, or the feeling of an extreme solitude, the impression of foolishness or infatuation. It's only in loving one finds wholeness, communion, wisdom in a lover's discourse. Love's secrets remain secret from all but lovers. My father loved me, but he also loved the common good of his community. It's my hope that I can share with you tonight some insights that can illuminate our own quest to live out a vocation to serve the common good in our times. I found that people like many of the stories I tell about my father. Tonight, however, the serious nature of these stories needs to be highlighted with the wisdom of a Native American woman named Silko, who writes in her novel Ceremony, "I will tell you something about stories. They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They are all we have, you see, all we have to fight off illness and death." So as we revisit both the love between my dad and I and the stories of his life, let's ask a question. How can these stories help us in the threats we face during this crisis of our times? Let's begin with the words my father wrote in my Bible. He said this, "To my dear son Gus, may this, the greatest of all books, follow you through life. Be mindful of human weakness, for we are part of attempt to set the highest haven. And remember, compass transcends failure to achieve. Love, Dad." That's the message my father wrote in the Bible, which he hand-covered in leather as a Christmas gift to me in 1974. It speaks poetically and in nautical terms of a journey. There's a profound reason he used nautical terms. He was an accomplished sailor and a decorated commander of a ship in the Pacific during World War II for the Navy. The first hope expressed here is that the greatest of all books, the Bible, will follow me through life. The hope was that I would understand the heart and purpose of the greatest of all books, the greatest story ever told. That I would set my compass to the true north and journey with God. And now my journey brings me back to the Paper Valley Hotel here in Appleton, the project my father and John Bergstrom worked on together in the 1980s to enhance the common good of this city. It's remarkable that the first project he tackled for the common good had to do with water. A bridge over a river. In the late 1950s, Appleton needed a high bridge over the river to connect the west side of the city to the east side of the city. The struggle to build this bridge was spearheaded by my father, and it really was his first prominent infrastructure project. Looking back, it's hard to imagine that there could even be objections to the East College Avenue Bridge. The city hired a consultant who recommended it to be built. However, Dad encountered two obstacles to this project for the common good. Two of the most prominent and wealthy families that owned large riverfront homes were opposed to the bridge because it would ruin their view of the river and the valley. Joining them in opposition to the bridge was a Lawrence professor who fought the project on the basis that it was a waste of money, which could be better spent elsewhere. Dad is quoted in the book, Call Me Gus, saying, "We had to fight like hell to build that bridge." End of quote. What was good for Appleton was plain to see, but it needed to be won in a fight with special interests. Dad was willing to confront people who bitterly opposed him and win the day when the common good was at stake. Looking back now, it was probably the battle for the East College Avenue Bridge that caused people in Appleton to realize that my father cared for the overall good of the city. He loved the common good of the city. Even the people who differed with him knew that he was trustworthy. Everyone learned over time that they could trust him not only for individual business and bank matters, but they could also trust him with projects that bore upon the common good of the city. How might we define the common good? It is the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. This is repeated in church teaching in a number of places. In many ways, my father attached his pursuit of commerce to the overall common good of the city. He never lost that sense of his vocation to business being encompassed by a greater good. To arrive at this common good, he had to look to something beyond the conflict of opposing causes, of party with party, and not just another cause. The common good here had to be something humanly complete, something whole and entire, like the human being. It must be the person, the whole we each are, or the common good, the whole that is greater than ourselves. Building physical bridges over the river was not the only way my father served the common good. He saw through economic factions in order to join his would-be opponents to secure a greater common good. One time, my father was chosen by a public high school to do a career day. As it turned out, he was going to share the podium with a union leader who was costing one of his good friends, my dad's good friends, thousands and thousands of dollars a day in lost production due to the fact that this man was leading a strike against that particular company. Not only did my dad meet with the union man, he brought him to the country club for lunch to plan the career day for the students. When the business owners at the other table saw this union leader eating with my father, they were scandalized and aghast, of course. His friends said, "How can Gus eat with that SOB that's causing us to lose so much money?" My father, in recounting the story to me, said, "Gussie, you know that not all the kids in that high school will grow up to run businesses like you have the opportunity to. Many of them will become members of that man's union and be skilled workers. It would have been wrong for me to hide my affiliation with that man who happened to be leading the strike against my friend's company. Because as far as the future generation goes, we're all in this together, even if there was a strike going on against one of the companies." We go on in what he wrote in my Bible. He wrote, "For we are part of attempt to set the highest haven," which again is poetic. He means we are part of the attempt to set the highest haven. My father was big on a management philosophy known as management by objectives. In this approach to management, you spent a lot of time setting goals. You had to have the goal in mind, and for him, the goal had to be worthwhile. So, when he wrote this statement in my Bible about we, that is, he and I, it was already a given that we both had high goals for ourselves. We were both part of the attempt to set the highest goals, to live by high ideals. There was always then the danger of failure. Thus, the advice to be mindful of human weakness. Notice that this advice is set before the statement about setting the highest haven, which in turn is followed by the statement about holding on to your moral and spiritual compass, even in the event of failures, to achieve your chosen goals. Never judge your compass simply upon your failures. Your compass always transcends your failures. As long as you journey with God and remain mindful of human weaknesses, both your own and those of others. One of the most significant ways that my father upheld the common good was his policy of mortgage lending. In the book, Call Me Gus by Kristen Stankiewicz, which was the wonderful book that she wrote where she interviewed my dad and his family and many other people around the valley and wrote about my dad. It was published in 2007. We read this: "Loan issues that involved family homes were especially important to Gus. He never foreclosed on a house where people lived. That was a rule I had, he said, and I made everyone adhere to it. One time, my father confronted a more complex situation that ultimately cost the corporation lost income and proved the fact that he held on to his high moral and spiritual compass in the face of human weakness. A federal investigator came to his office to tell him that the corporate investment officer was actually using the bank's collateral to invest his own funds. Now, those of you who know something about that know what an incredible breach of federal law that was. This breach of federal law would land that man in prison. On the spot, my father looked at the federal investigator and said, "I will have to fire him, and I can make sure he'll never work for a bank or financial institution around here again. But I would not want to prosecute him, as he has a wife and 3 children." My father was actually able to convince the federal investigator of his plan. In those days, the investment office for the bank was upstairs. So my father personally walked up to see the man he would have to fire. When he reached the office, the man had already left. My father later found out that this man had taken another job outside of banking and financial services, but he had also taken with him one of the bank's biggest corporate investment accounts and placed it with his new employer. During that time of tight money, it was the 1970s, this was a great blow to the bank's bottom line, yet my father never regretted his choice to keep that man out of prison. "Gussie," he said to me when he told me this, with tears running down his cheeks, "that man had a wife and 3 children." You know, Dad had the wisdom to qualify his quest for justice with mercy. A mercy that was connected with the common good. A mercy that looks beyond the sins of the individual and acted with care toward that man's wife and children. Ultimately, he was simply applying his mortgage policy to a more complex situation. He even got the federal investigator to go along with his merciful plan. So, while my father put in strong policies to protect families from one of the worst consequences of financial failure, the loss of the family home, he also knew how to motivate his managers to set the highest goals in their work, to attempt to reach the highest haven. Quote, this is from Dick Jones in Call Me Gus. "I could not have asked for a better person to work for, because when he gave you an assignment, and then he knew you could do it, and then you found out how it could get done, he wasn't looking over your shoulder. He didn't push people. He expected things, it just got done. He trusted people to get it done." This statement is a great example of how my father implemented management by objectives strategy. Obviously, he communicated enough with his employees to set goals, but he left them free to move toward them. He provided vision and worked with people to establish their objectives. But once the highest haven was set, as it were, he allowed people freedom to act in their own way. He didn't push them, nor did he constantly try to control people by looking over their shoulder. As Dick Jones points out here, that was a very helpful way to motivate people so that common goals could become their own. The dedication my father wrote in my Bible has a nautical quality, as I mentioned before. It's helpful to reflect that he spent 3 years as a commander of a ship and saw sea battles in the Pacific during World War II. He received the Bronze Star Medal for valor for some quick thinking and getting some Marines the things they needed to stay alive during the invasion of Saipan. He actually broke formation and went into the harbor prior to the invasion. His commanding officer on another ship, seeing that my father was going into the harbor ahead of the invasion, broke radio silence and called him an SOB because of my father's unexpected action. My father went in during high tide, and then he had to stay during low tide until he got the Marines on the beach what they needed. He took on enemy fire and yet managed to overcome the trouble. And because of his action on that beach, the Marines recommended that my father get a decoration for his heroism. Of course, most of my father's time in the war was not in battles. He said most of the war is not fighting, it's sitting doing nothing. While in the Navy, I would read 2 or 3 books a week. I got through all those old Russian novels, all those things I didn't get time to read at school. I'd go aboard a carrier and they'd have a big library, and I'd take a handful of books. Reading was good relaxation because I wasn't supposed to associate with my crew because I was an officer. Dad exhibited that profound interiority that made it possible for him to continue his moral education. He read the classics while he was at sea. Reading, as Proust says, is that fertile miracle of a communication effected in solitude. Dad creatively uses alone time in the Navy to deepen his connection with the classic writings of Western civilization. He mentions his reading 2 to 3 books a week during that time. During his banking career later, he read about 1 book a week, all different types of fiction and nonfiction. Dad cultivated inner silence in a number of other ways that I noticed. Every other year, he attended a 4-day silent retreat put on by the Jesuit priests in Oshkosh at their retreat center. These silent retreats were opportunities for Dad to enter into what the theologian John Donne calls the center of stillness surrounded by silence. Dad would also sit up at night and read the newspaper and magazine reports, and when no one was around, he would sometimes even weep with empathy for people who were afflicted. As mentioned in Call Me Gus, Dad didn't cry in public. One major exception was in the cemetery at his father's funeral. But at home, in private, he had real tears of mourning and compassion for people. And that's pretty... he was in control. He knew there was a time to mourn, and then there was a time to refrain from mourning, and he kept by that. My father used the word compass in the dedication that he wrote in my Bible. I think it has profound layers of meaning. The dictionary defines moral compass as an internalized set of values and objectives that guide a person with regard to ethical behavior and decision making. I subtitled this presentation The Legacy of Gus Zuehlke Sr. as a remedy for the crisis of our times. The word crisis in Chinese characters, I'm told, combines the character for the word danger and the character for the word opportunity. The danger of our times, it seems to me, is that we don't have a compass that can steer us together toward a common good. The opportunity of our times, it seems to me, is that the very difficulties we're now enduring are opportunities to even remember what a compass even is. I think it's in this little word compass that we encounter how my father's life exemplifies a remedy. He was a man whose moral compass guided him to fight like hell, to build a bridge, or to build a Catholic high school, to build a bank, build an airline, build up a hospital, and like we are here today, to build a hotel, even a hotel that's almost completely empty right now due to the pandemic. The building is still here. Thanks, Dad. And John Bergstrom. In short, my father was willing to stand up boldly and ask the question that Oscar Bolt told us about at my dad's funeral lunch. The question was, what's good for Appleton? When a reasonable answer could be found, my father fought, as he said, again, like hell, quote unquote, to implement the answer in flesh and blood. So the common good is not just something we talk about. It's something we accomplish together. And the church points this out in her wisdom. The common good corresponds to the highest of human instincts, but it's a good that is very difficult to attain because it requires the constant ability and effort to seek the good of others as if it were one's own good. In reference to that, it's my hope that the fears that surround us right now of the impending dark winter, quote unquote, give way to the love of the common good, exemplified here by my father's journey. The gift of faith, you see, sees light with your heart when all your eyes see is darkness. The dark winter can be transformed into the dark light of love when we are willing to go out in the darkness and put your hand into the hand of God. For in the hand of God, love is stronger than death and stronger than fear, because perfect love casts out all fear. Please remember me as loving you. Thank you very much.